Hey, Mom, what are we going to talk about today?
Hey, Katie. Today we're going to talk about a designer who gave up his lunch money as a child to buy a pair of clogs.
Welcome to the Modig Designer Series, where we're doing deep dives on different designers. We started with Margarita Lai of Escada, and now we are going to do American designer Geoffrey Beene.
Yes.
In your 30 plus years of collecting vintage clothing, what is it about Geoffrey Beene that stands out?
I think Geoffrey Beene represents the best of American 20th century design. He epitomized simplicity and elegance. He was known as the godfather of minimalism, a true designer's designer. So designers really appreciate who he is. And I think most designers, if you talk to them who have worked with him or who have studied under him or have even seen his work, understand why he's so important. Tom Ford and Marc Jacobs were asked who they thought the most important or influential designer of the 20th century in America was. They both, without hesitation, said Geoffrey Beene.
Oh, wow. It's like the restaurant all the chefs go to after they're done.
Exactly. That's exactly who he is. And I think just his techniques and his mastery of cutting and precision in design are just so admired by true designers who understand how hard that is to do.
Yes.
Even Albert Elbaz, who worked under him, says he owed everything to Geoffrey Beene.
Yeah, because doing all of that, having all that technique, but then the finished result is minimalist.
Yes,
that's one of the hardest things to do.
Yes, which is what he said. Minimalism is the hardest thing to accomplish because you have to have this basic skills not only honed in. You have to have a true design aesthetic. You have to know where you're going with it. You can't just make something simple and call it minimalism. It's much more than that.
You have to master all of the basics. You have to know so much in order to strip it all away.
Yes.
So did he grow up in the United States?
Yes. He was actually born in Louisiana.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, I think his design passion started as a young child. He saw a pair of clogs in a catalog and asked his mother if he could buy them. And she said, absolutely not. It's ridiculous. As I've told you when you were younger many times.
Well, I understand the love of a clog.
Yes. And then she started noticing after a while he was losing weight and took him to the doctor and thought something was wrong with him. But actually he was pocketing his lunch money and saving it. And he actually bought the clogs on his own. So I love that story because I think it started pretty young. And he came from a long line of physicians. And so was expected to go to medical school. So he got a scholarship to Tulane and then went to medical school and found himself, instead of drawing anatomy in his anatomy notebooks, he was drawing Gilbert Adrian sketches of dresses. So I think he knew this is not for me. And then the day they went to see cadavers, he definitely knew. And he left medical school pretty soon thereafter.
I can relate.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, you passed out.
I passed out when I
you did.
Had an anatomy class and we had to see a cadaver.
But you didn't become a famous designer. So
I didn't.
That piece was missing.
There was a piece.
Yeah.
There's an element.
Oops. Next time, Katie. And then he went to LA for a while. He dressed the windows at I. Magnin. He moved to New York and studied there. And then he finally went to Paris, which was amazing. Once he moved to Paris, he worked with the head tailor at Edward Molyneux. So he learned couturier techniques and precision cutting. And that combined with his understanding of the human body really is the basis for how he became such a good designer.
So why do so many designers, because he's an American designer, but why do they all go to France?
Well, I think that was the heart of fashion at the time. And America didn't really have its identity yet as a fashion industry. It was more of a place that copied French fashion. And that was where the couture houses were. And his first couture runway show, I believe, was Schiaparelli. And so imagine seeing that in her heyday and seeing those beautiful pieces on the runway. So I think it was just the place she went. It changed. It changed after the Battle of Versailles. It changed quite a bit, as more American designers started to develop their skills. But at the time, they had to go to Paris to learn those techniques. They weren't even taught here. And most of them did need to go and study under a couturier to understand and see and actually feel and touch.
Yeah, that apprenticeship aspect.
So, which is lost today in a lot of places. Yeah.
So there were a lot of Geoffrey Beene contemporaries that we still talk about today. I feel like Geoffrey Beene's name isn't out there with the general public in the way that, say, Yves Saint Laurent or Coco Chanel. They're known. Why is Geoffrey Beene somewhat under the radar? Why is it more of a, if you know, designer?
He was a very unique designer in that he did not play to trend and he did not play the game of fashion. So he was disliked by some people because he had standing feuds with people like Diana Vreeland. And I believe he even had conflict with Anna Wintour. He refused to let someone use his advertising dollars as a kind of hold him hostage that way. You have to advertise or we won't feature you. He didn't really play the fashion game. And I think when he came along, when he was really seeing the height of his designs, really in the 90s, when he became very, very famous and was doing really well, I think that was when the fashion game was really ticking up here and becoming really important that you had to play. And I don't think he enjoyed that.
And during that time too, there were a lot of, I think, younger designers taking over some of the bigger labels that had gotten a little stale and trying to make a name for themselves within that fashion house. And then that fashion house, gets really big. And he was just trying to do his thing.
Yes. And he was really proud of that. I mean, he loved the things that he did. I mean, he originally brought wool jersey into the ballroom. No one ever wore wool jersey in an evening gown. That was just unheard of. And he mixed fabrics in a way that was so unique. We have pieces of example behind me, but mixing lace with taffeta and wool and then taking cutouts and putting them in places where you don't normally expect cutouts. And the way he cut his designs were so flattering on the silhouette. There are some women in the United States who only really exclusively bought Geoffrey Beene pieces and he would design for them and they were such devotees that they literally thought there was no one who could design clothing for them except Geoffrey Beene. Wow. And he dressed a lot of women. He even dressed Anna Wintour. He dressed a lot of women wanted to wear Geoffrey Beene. It's just once you've put it on and you understand the cut and the feel of it, I think you kind of start to see what talent is there. It's hard in a 21st century viewpoint to look back at some of these pieces that might look relatively simple and say, I don't understand. But I think a designer understands because they know what went into that.
Yeah. And the thing of, when something fits you right.
Yes.
And so if his is just cut perfectly, and has all those interior things that don't show, but just make it fit just so. There's just nothing like that.
And the interesting thing about Geoffrey Beene too is that he took the fabric and the fabric became his inspiration. So instead of saying, I've got this idea for a dress, now what fabric is going to be best for this dress? He said, now what could I do with this fabric to make it work on the human body? And so he understood the human body, of course, because that was what he studied. And that really helped. I think it helped define movement. His pieces have beautiful movement. He was one of the first designers to do a multimedia show with his runway. And he used dancers from the American Ballet Theater, which was unheard of. Now we're so used to this multimedia and we're so used to all these things that it's hard to look back.
Yeah, because now it's almost expected.
It seems like it's just the norm.
Yeah.
And the mixing of fabrics is the norm now. But if you ask any designer who has done that, they will point back to Geoffrey Beene as being the first.
Wow.
But his work with the dancers is phenomenal. Beautiful. You can really see the pieces moving the way they were meant to move.
What era would that have been?
In the 90s.
In the 90s, okay. When was his big era? When did he make his name?
I mean, he won a Coty Award after his first year of designing.
Wow.
And within the year after he started his own label, he had a dress on the cover of Vogue. So that was in the 60s. And he had he had pieces in every era. I think he's known a lot for his 60s pieces, and then he's known again for the 90s quite a bit. I mean, we have full range. He was such a quiet designer in the way that he did things and the way he operated his business that it wasn't publicity strewn all over the place. And I think that probably maybe hurt his legacy a little bit. But I think once people delve in and start really studying fashion, you appreciate Geoffrey Beene.
Yeah, because he's not relying on a logo
or hype. Right.
Or hype or building in that way.
Right.
He's 100% the clothes and how they
He's
fit
authentic,
and how they look.
Authentic designer. Yeah. Who didn't really listen to what the world said.
Of all the Geoffrey Beene pieces we have, what is your favorite?
My favorite piece that Geoffrey Beene designed that we have owned is probably this dress. And it's a beautiful black voile with pretty pale purple or lavender flowers. And I love the wide belt and the beautiful Chelsea collar. and the bishop sleeves that are sheer with wide, wide cuffs, which he made so beautifully. And it's one of my favorite pieces. It's an understated dress, but so elegant in person.
Yeah.
And then I would say we have an alpaca coat that has black trim and spiral embroidery throughout it that goes over a wool dress for the evening, strapless dress, which I think is beautiful. He was known for his little bolero jackets, and you can almost instantly recognize one of them. We have a purple one behind us, and he would do these cropped jackets, sometimes really cropped, right under the bust line.
But whimsical.
Whimsical, yes.
Had like a little
type
whimsy
edge to them. Yeah, just a little bit of whimsy.
Like a little tassel or like a little point or something. They're so cool.
So I think one of the things that stands out for me in terms of Geoffrey Beene's aversion to trend is that he understood the importance of dressing like an individual. And in America, he could see that women were more likely to be affected by the masses and by popular opinion. And I think he really wanted women to find that identity and wear what felt right on them.
And his pieces sometimes are hard to pinpoint within an era.
Oh, yeah.
Because he was not designing so much as, a reflection of the times. He was kind of just blazing his own trail.
Which is very rare. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to do something like that.
Yes.
When it's very easy to just bow down to trend.
He could do it because he was so talented.
Right. And he had earned a reputation that gave him that freedom.
You have to back it up with the actual skills.
Exactly. Yes, you have to have the talent.
You have to have the talent.
Start like that.
Yeah. What was Geoffrey Beene like as a person?
Well, I think you called him Mr. Beene, first of all. So no one called him Geoffrey. So that might give you a little. He was a gentleman, a Southern gentleman, what you would imagine. He got I think an unwarranted reputation for being difficult to work with, and I think it was because he had a long-standing feud with Women's Wear Daily, which you did not do if you were a designer in those days. Some people say it's because he refused to provide them with advanced sketches of the dress he designed for Lady Bird Johnson's daughter's wedding.
That seems petty.
Yeah, a tiny bit. Yeah, a little bit of petty going on. Some people say it's because he refused to pay the advertising rates. And he would only buy a little tiny advertisement instead of a big one. So you never know, but they had a long-standing feud that lasted until he died. So it never was resolved. And, Diana Vreeland had asked him to design a dress for her for some special event she was going to. And he put all this work into it and money into it. And then she said, "Oh, I've changed my mind. I'm doing something else." So that,
Not to Mr.
Nice.
Beene.
No, you don't do that to
Mr.
Beene.
Beene.
So I think he just had standards. In some ways, nowadays we would respect that. We'd go, "Wow, yeah, you don't do that to people." Because if you're someone in an industry where you feel like you have to constantly be begging and scraping for everything and doing everything everybody says to do to be famous, and somebody comes along and goes, "I'm not going to do that."
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage, and maybe
it's threatening on the other side.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes. I can't imagine being that brave.
No.
Starting out.
Especially in such a cutthroat industry.
And and he knew that he had the talent. I mean, you do know when you're a designer. I think Yves Saint Laurent knew.
Yes.
Clearly Coco Chanel knew. People who have that once in a lifetime, once in a generation talent, they know.
Yeah.
It's not a secret.
Yeah. You don't want to have to placate to people who don't have that talent.
And don't understand
and
it.
aren't even in that world. They're just in the advertising world.
Exactly. So I can't say whether he was really difficult because I never met him, unfortunately. But I kind of think that history...
You would not be cool if you met him.
I would fall apart.
You would lose it.
I would be a bad fangirl.
Fangirl.
No, it would not be fun. No. Yeah, he would be somebody because I meet a lot of we meet a lot of celebrities. And I don't get uncool. No. I would be uncool around him.
You would be uncool.
And Yves Saint Laurent, I couldn't even be in the same room.
No. Who was the other one? I mean, there's a few, but I do think Yves Saint Laurent, Geoffrey Beene,
Patrick Kelly, Franco Moschino's another one.
Franco Moschino. Yeah. There was someone else recently. Oh gosh.
Oh, Pierre Cardin.
Pierre Cardin. Yes. Pierre Cardin.
Couldn't be in the same room.
Lose your cool.
No, I would. Yeah. I'd have to have you go in as a proxy and ask questions. But I do think Geoffrey Beene will be remembered forever by designers. I would love for the American public to really embrace him more. And I think they will. I think eventually they will. But I think he's just exceptional, having had all of these clothes that we've touched all these years. And you can kind of see some of them, and I won't name names, but we kind of go, kind of overtyped a little bit. These clothes are not that great.
Right.
And then other ones where you go, why don't more people understand how beautiful it is? His pieces feel more like couture to me.
They do. They really do.
The seams are always finished, and they're just They're done right.
What are ways that Geoffrey Beene has inspired you, whether it be just his design aesthetic or the way that he lived his life, conducted his business? Is there anything that you take from that as inspirational?
I'd like to be called Mr. or Mrs.
Yeah, I like that.
Other than that, I think just his bravery and courage, and he knew what he wanted.
Yes.
And being inspired by fabric to me is such a beautiful thing. And taking something that's just lifeless and giving it life. And I think that he made clothing move.
Yeah.
And that moves me.
Wow.
So to speak.
So for a designer with such a long tenure from the 60s through the early 2000s, how did his design aesthetic change?
I think his most distinct markers were his fabric choices. So in the beginning, he used a lot heavier fabrics. So we have dresses from the 60s, and we've had some that we've sold, and we still have a current one, a pink one, really hot pink, almost salmon hot pink dress. That's a very thick wool knit, and it's heavier to wear. It's still beautifully made.
Yes,
nice
it is. It is sturdy.
Sturdy.
Yeah.
And then with time, his garments became more and more fluid. And I think he embraced jersey heavily. And so I think if he had kept designing, there would have been a lot more jersey, a lot more flowing movement with pieces that had a lot of just almost air-like quality to them.
Interesting. And that's kind of like what you were saying about the movement, where he started embracing fabrics that could move.
He loved movement, yes.
Yeah.
And I also think he would have gotten really involved with high tech and fabrics. I think he was very interested in that and wanted to see where that went and wanting to understand how you could use these fabrics in different ways. And I'm sure he would have mixed something like a modern day Lycra with a wool. I mean, I could see him doing something like that and then adding lace and who knows what else. But he was experimenting his whole life. I really think that's why his designs can look so different from every single collection. Some designers have a mainstay, and you watch their collections throughout the years, and there are themes that are repeated.
Yes.
There are styles that are repeated and changed and tweaked for the generations. But he definitely had, it almost looks like a different designer.
Yeah, it's
every
true.
season, which is fun.
Very true. So with so many different styles and different types of pieces, if you are wanting to start collecting Geoffrey Beene, what should you be looking for? And also, where should you start?
I think most importantly, anytime you're starting a collection, whether it's a designer or you're collecting an era or whatever you're collecting, make sure it brings you joy and that you love it. And I think if you get to know his labels, get to know his earliest label. He had a label called Beanbag, which was a little bit of a more of a diffusion label. So if you want to collect the actual Geoffrey Beene main collection pieces, you want to look for the Geoffrey Beene label. And it changed throughout the years, and you can see how it...
And the menswear was completely separate.
Completely separate, yes.
Yeah. Was Beanbag like a youth line?
It was a youth line, yes. A lot of diffusion lines started out being called youth lines because they wanted people to be able to afford it of that, generation.
Yeah. I know you pretty well.
Yes, you do.
And I've been with you a long time now doing this business. You tend to not keep things.
No, I don't.
Can you talk about one of the things that you kept?
Because I kept a necklace that is, it's a bolero necklace that has strands of chains, and it's from Geoffrey Beene's foundation. So it has Geoffrey Beene's initials on it.
Oh, wow.
So I would love to think that he wore it.
He probably did.
He probably did, because I don't know why anybody would want a necklace that had GB.
No.
But I wear it and think of him.
So if you have any questions about Geoffrey Beene or anything about vintage in general, you can just comment down below and we will get back to you.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.